As James said, I'm going to be reporting on the work coming from the Farming Systems Project. This is a project that was started in 2017, and there's a very long list of collaborators there. I'll show you them by name here. We have a CSIRO team, New South Wales team, and very importantly, growers and advisors involved, and FarmLink involved as well, just to make sure that all of the treatments we're exploring, all the things that we're doing are basically realistic. We don't do anything at control sites that's unrealistic. It all goes through this sort of panel of advisors around each of the sites. And thank you to those people and to the growers who two of the sites are on farms, and also to FarmLink and the team who came into the second phase to help us get some of the information more effectively out. So Australian farmers have been very good at adopting benchmarks like water use efficiency to look at the efficient use of water of individual crops. But in a dryland farming system, water, weeds, nitrogen, fertility carries over from year to year in important ways. And what we wanted to do in this project is look at whether we were converting rainfall into profit efficiently across an entire crop sequence. And often that's difficult on an individual farm because there's so much going on, there's so many things changing. But we wanted to see whether we could lift that and how to lift that while managing all these important parts of the system. And the three different things that we've been exploring, three different changes, I guess, to the farming system, they'd all been looked at individually in the past, but never pulled together like in a system. So one is bringing more legumes into the system. The second one is lifting our nitrogen supply. We know nitrogen's the biggest limit for achieving our water limited potential in Australia. We also know nitrogen, or the rundown of nitrogen in our soil, is reducing our soil organic matter. So managing nitrogen effectively is really crucial in lifting that efficiency, whether it comes from fertiliser or legume. And that's what I'll be talking about mostly today, focusing on those two things. But we also, at the sites, we also looked at earlier sowing of crops, both grazed crops and ungrazed crops at a couple of the sites. But I won't go into that too much today. I'll be focusing more on this sort of nitrogen and nitrogen legacy results. So the sort of systems that we're comparing, this was all, in 2017 we spoke to more than 300 advisors and growers about what they wanted to see. And essentially what they said is, look, our current baseline systems are either a canola wheat barley or canola wheat. That was the sort of baseline system. And they wanted to see that in all of the experiments and compared to introducing legumes of different types into the system. And they wanted to see how that played out over time. And those legumes can be more traditional things that we grow, like lupins or favours. They wanted to see the more higher valued, higher risk type things that were coming down from the north and up from the south, the lentils and the chickpeas, would they work? And then increasingly people are using things like vegetability, using it in very diverse ways, either grazing, manuring, cutting hay. And then we had a few other treatments at the different sites, just depending on what the growers in that area and the advisors wanted to see. So that's our sort of different diversity and baseline sequences we've been running. And then across that, in some of the treatments, we've been including two different nitrogen strategies. Essentially, we measure the nitrogen in the soil every year at every plot of sowing. And when we get the top dressing time, we either assume the year is going to finish as a decile 2 or a decile 7. We predict what the yield would be if that were to happen, and we put on enough nitrogen to hit those yield targets. So what you'd essentially say is, it's a more conservative nitrogen strategy versus a more robust nitrogen strategy. And no matter what the year did, we just kept running with a decile 2 and a decile 7. And as you'll see, we've had quite a few different types of years over the 6. But on average, that came out, just to put you in the ballpark, that came out at about 75 kilos of N on our decile 2 on average across the system, and about 130 or so on our decile 7. And then, as I said, we also included at some sites the earlier sowing of longer season varieties compared to the more traditional timely sowing in May of our sort of normal spring varieties. So we've been running 4 sites. Matt Dunn and and his team run 3 sites with New South Wales DPI at Wagga, Condo, and on a farm at Urana. So the Greenthorpe, Wagga, Condo, they're all red, sort of typical red acidic loams, just going from higher rainfall to lower. And the Urana is quite a different site. It's on a heavier clay soil. You can see a bit of waterlogging in the background in that picture, so it gets very wet. A little bit of salinity at depth, so just a different soil to manage. And just to remind you, you probably don't need any reminding, but that's all the rainfall records over the 6 years, and I would describe that as dry, really dry, wet, wet. And then last year we had more of a sort of a typical season with a pretty good start and then a fairly dry spring in places. Urana didn't do too bad last year, so those red numbers are the decile rainfall. But just to assure you, we've had quite a diverse set of, and actually rather extreme seasons to manage, and then last year was fairly good. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'm just summarising most of the data in the form of the gross margin. That's how we calculate a gross margin, so take a look at that, and in your own mind you may have to adjust however you do that for your own business, but that's the data I'm showing you, and I'm showing you the gross margin for the whole system over the 6 years, so the average annual gross margin over the 6 years, taking into account all that climatic variability. And you'll hear me talk a lot about the baseline strategy. And as I said, the baseline strategy was the sort of canola wheat barley or canola wheat system with relatively conservative nitrogen and sown in May. That was the sort of system that we wanted to compare everything against. And so we'll be doing a lot of comparison of that, where we swap out the barley for a legume, and then we'll talk a little bit about whether increasing the nitrogen strategy, what that's done, and the legacy of that. And I won't talk too much about early sowing and grazing today. So I've got a few, I guess, high-level messages. And the first thing I wanted to assure you is that we're not trying to sell you any best system. Basically, on your farm, in your business, on different paddocks in your business, there's going to be different systems that suit. So it's about options. But what we want to do is show you how the options compare, and then let you make decisions about how that might fit into your business. But the good news is that the baseline systems that everybody told us in 2017 was the typical system, they've been profitable. They've been among the top 5 in gross margin over the 6 years. You can see it sort of varies, as you might expect, in terms of annual average gross margin, which is what I'm showing there, those numbers, sort of increases as you'd expect with increasing rainfall and yield potential across those sites. But basically the better news is that at every site there were options with higher profit and lower risk or better return on investment. So that means we're doing pretty well, but some of the things we've tried at these different sites have lifted our profit over the 6 years and reduced and increased our return on investment. And that's what we'll dig into a bit today, like what were those options and what was going on. First of all, if we reduce the diversity, so if we have less diversity than the baseline, so if you go to continuous wheat, let's just say that hasn't been very profitable, 150 to 250 bucks less profitable than the baseline. And I think at 2 of the sites, the growers didn't even want to see that. They just said, we don't do that anymore. But we had it at 2 of the sites, and it didn't do very well. If you intensify the baseline, so if you go from a canola wheat barley system to canola wheat, so that really intense baseline, as we called it, we got variable results. Comparing that to the baseline was quite variable across the sites. And just to show you how it compared to the baseline, you can see there at Condo and Greenthorpe, it was a little bit more profitable over the 6 years. At Urana and Wagga, it was quite a bit less profitable. And there was a range of reasons for that. You can see if we increase the nitrogen fertiliser, so you'd imagine going to canola wheat, you've got canola in there more frequently, you're probably going to have to up your nitrogen. So if we look at the upping the nitrogen and changing that rotation. It doesn't do any better at Condo. It's now only $28 better than the baseline, instead of 45. It's done a lot better at Urana. It's gone from a negative to higher than the baseline. Wagga's a little less negative, and at Greenthorpe it actually paid. So in that higher rainfall environment, it's, well, not paid. We've got a higher return on. We've got a higher gross margin when we put high nitrogen and we intensified at Greenthorpe. So it's done pretty well in that environment. But everywhere, at all of the sites, when we shifted to that intense baseline, the variability in gross margin increased. So they did very poorly in the dry seasons, but they did quite well in the wet seasons. So you sort of yield, your profitability jumped around from dry to wet seasons, and the return on investment either stayed the same or it went down. So you're investing more money, to make the same money. So that's what happened when we sort of just intensified the baseline system. When we shifted to legumes, and I'm not going to go through all those different legume options today because I won't have time, but what I can tell you is that the system with what we call the low value, low risk legumes, so either favours or lupins, with the lower nitrogen fertiliser strategy, it was the best of all of the legume options around all 4 sites. At some sites there are other legume options that matched it, but it was always among the top. And this system generally was always in the top 5 in terms of profitability as well. And so if I bring up that baseline again that I showed you right at the start, and this is now how the diverse low value system compared to the baseline around the sites. Again, you can see it varied a little bit depending on where we were. So it was a little bit less profitable at Condobolin, very much more profitable at Urana. The system with favours down there has just gone really well. At Wagga, a little less profitable, but Greenthorpe a little more. So there's different reasons for that. But this system was up there and among the top 5 at all the sites over the 6 years. And it consistently had a higher return on investment than the baseline. So, we're spending less money to make that money. So, lower risk. I'm going to do a fair bit of comparing of these 2 sites, Urana and Wagga, just because they are the more extremes. So, what happened at Condo, what happened at Greenthorpe, sort of, those 2 sites, Urana and Wagga, had the most extreme. Urana, really good response from this diverse system, and Wagga less so, and we'll sort of dig into a bit about why that is. So, if we're exploring the value of the nitrogen, obviously most people are putting legumes into the system to get nitrogen benefits. There's other reasons, but that's the main one we're sort of focused on. If you're exploring that, then I guess there's a few questions. How much extra nitrogen is there after the legumes? How much less fertiliser do I have to apply in my system because of that? Do I get any other yield benefits aside from that extra nitrogen? And how that adds up? How does that up over the whole system to improve my profit and reduce risk? So I've just dug into that a little bit and pulled out some numbers to sort of show you. So the first question was, here I'm comparing the baseline system, which I said is barley, canola and wheat, and I'm comparing that with a legume system where we put a legume in to replace the barley. And what I'm showing you in here is how much extra nitrogen mineralised over summer across all those 6 years, because we measured nitrogen at harvest and at sowing every plot in every year. We know how much N is mineralising. And so that's the increase in mineral N mineralisation over the summer fallow. And so you can see in all cases it's increased. Different at different sites. It's going to be driven by summer rainfall and soil type and a lot of other things. But and so if you look at how much mineral N was sitting in the profile just before sowing that canola crop, and I've done the sums for you here. So, an extra 30 to 100 kilos of N, on average, was sitting in the soil after the legume before that canola crop, compared to after the barley crop in this case. And then, if you can then ask, well, does that legume nitrogen continue through the system? Remember, we're fertilising in winter. We're top dressing according to a given yield potential. And so it's quite possible, and we're putting on different amounts of nitrogen because of these differences, but it's quite possible that that nitrogen will just even up all the yields and you wouldn't sort of see much effect, and that it might also block out any extra nitrogen coming through from the legume because we're just topping things up with more fertiliser. However, before the wheat year, so in the second crop, which was wheat, and prior to the wheat, you can see we're also, except for condo, we're also getting some extra mineral nitrogen that's coming through after the legume, in the legume system compared to the baseline system. So that nitrogen legacy is carrying on, and that gives you an idea of the sort of numbers that at least we measured over the whole 6 years. And so that generates savings. As I said, that's going to create savings in the amount of nitrogen you have to apply in a system following a legume to hit the same yield target. And this is a summary of how much less nitrogen, so the reduction in nitrogen that we applied in kilos per hectare in the system. Now, obviously, most of the savings are in the legume year because you don't put nitrogen on legumes. But you can see we also got savings in the canola yield, and we also, except for condo, got some savings in the wheat year as well. So there are quite significant savings in nitrogen in the legume system, and that's one of the things that generates benefits and economic benefits. So yes, we are getting some savings in applied nitrogen, certainly. And then if you ask, are we seeing yield benefits on top of the nitrogen savings? Are we seeing yield benefits in the legume system to the following crops? And this is the data now for Wagga. I'm just comparing those two sites. Remember, Wagga, we didn't see much economic benefit on average for this legume system, but at Urana we did. And there's a few differences between Wagga and Urana that are driving that, we think. So, at Wagga, on average, over the 6 years, our barley yielded 6 tonnes per hectare, and the lupin, which was the legume we had at Wagga, yielded about 3.1 tonnes per hectare. Remember then, we sort of top up the nitrogen. When we go to grow the following canola crop, we sort of predict its yield, we measure the nitrogen, predict the yield, we put different amounts of N on to try and hit the yield target, and we've hit a similar yield target, so there doesn't seem to be any additional yield benefits flowing through in that system, at least at Wagga. And the wheat, there's a bit of a hint that the wheat yield is down a bit in the lupin system, so not really sure what might be driving that, but it was very different at Urana. So at Urana, we also, the barley there yielded similarly to Wagga, about 6.2 tonnes over the 6 years, but we had favour in the system there, and favours yielded 4.7 on average over the 6 years. And there you can see a significant increase in canola yield, so 0.3 of a tonne extra on average canola yield. That varied up to a 0.7 of a tonne extra canola after the favours in one of the years. So that's at canola prices over the last 6 years. That was quite a significant economic benefit. Not much flowing through to the wheat yield in that system. So if we look then at where is that difference in gross margin between Wagga and Urana coming from that I showed you with the legume systems, if you look at what's going on at Wagga, on average we're down $100 over the 6 years in our gross margin, and the main reason for that is that the lupin's a lot less profitable than the barley in that part of the system, because the canola and the wheat, in terms of their gross margins, they're not terribly different, and they balance out a little bit. The big difference is that $300 difference in the gross margin between the lupin and the barley. At Urana, where the legume system is much more profitable, the reason is that every crop in that system is benefiting. The favours were more profitable than the barley. The canola was much more profitable after the favours, and it carried right through to the wheat. So in that system, we're seeing benefits of the legumes continuing right through. And the reason behind that, well, we'll talk a bit about the reason behind that. In terms of return on investment, you can see that at Wagga we do have a benefit in terms of reduction in the nitrogen we had to apply in the system overall. The The total cost of the lupins is lower, so it really is about the revenue. The lupins are just not making as much money as a grain crop as the barley was for us. So that's the part of the system that's letting us down there, and that's why the gross margin is lower. But the return on investment, so how much money you're making for the amount of money you're spending, is still higher in that lupin system. And then if you look at Urana, again, we've made quite significant savings in the amount of nitrogen. In this case, the total costs are fairly similar, but because of that extra revenue I showed you, because of the yield of all the crops, benefits and the income benefits, that's where the big benefits coming from, and a really good return on investment as well, much big increase in return on investment. So if you put the risk versus reward graph, so this is the average annual gross margin over the 6 years on the y-axis, and I've plotted that against the return on investment. So where you want to be is up in that top right-hand corner. You want to be making a lot of money on average, but you don't want to be, and you don't want to be spending much money to do that. So the top right-hand corner is where you'd like to be, and the bottom left-hand corner is where you don't want to be. So you can see now where the system sits. So our baseline system is sitting down there. The diverse low values system, for Wagga this is, wasn't making as much money on average, but a better return on investment. So we've sort of moved a bit to the right, but we've moved down a little bit. You can basically see the intense baseline, where we actually made less money and we spent more to do it. So that's not something that was working well at Wagga. And the continuous wheat was making the least money and quite low in terms of return on investment. So, you know, we want to be moving our systems up in that direction. And if we could lift the average gross margin from that diverse system, which is what happened at Urana, as I'll show you, that's going to move us in the right direction. If you look at Urana, it's now a different story. So that's where our baseline system is. At Urana, the diverse system is making much more money. It's making more money on average. You're spending less money to make it, so it's moved up into that, into that area where we really want to be. And the other systems at the different intense systems with either higher nitrogen or more canola at Urana haven't really moved us in the right direction. They're sort of lower down and further to the left. So this is now, instead of showing you the average over the 6 years, this is how the gross margin sort of panned out. So in your business, this is how your wealth would have been accumulating over the 6 years from 2018. So you can basically see how income in the wet years, the good years, really dominates. Because you see the first 2 dry years in 18, 19, everything was making much less money. There's still some differences between the systems. And what you see here is that the diverse system at Wagga, was the green line, was going quite well compared to the baseline early on in those dry seasons. But the more wet seasons we had, one after another, it was much more difficult with the legumes. We're spending a lot more money on fungicides. They're often suffering in those wet conditions, whereas the canola was sort of really going well in the wet conditions, and so the baseline sort of pulls away from the diverse baseline. You can see the continuous wheat is just heading off on a much lower trajectory. And so the systems after 6 years are kind of starting to diverge, although we're still seeing a bit of swapping around between dry and wet seasons. And you compare that with Urana now, and you can see at Urana the system with favour beans has just always done well. It did well in the dry years, continued to do well in the wet years, and that's partly due to the profitability of the phases and the amount of nitrogen legacy that the favours are leaving. So just a bit of a comparison of those two sites. The key messages are that really it's about options. It's not really about one system is better than another, but I've tried to sort of show you at least how the nitrogen legacies play out. Diverse systems have been quite profitable with a high return on investment, and at 2 of the 4 sites, they're still either the most or equal most profitable, but at Condo and Wagga not so. The legume Clearly, nitrogen legacy does play a part in that, but there's other factors involved, like I said, the profitability of the legume that's in the system. Fertiliser nitrogen can increase profit when we went to those higher intensive, higher end systems, but they also came with higher risk. And it seems like the systems are starting to diverge. Now, I think we've got time, haven't we? I will, if Matt wants to talk about, you want me to keep going? Or?
John, can I just ask a question?
Yeah, please. We can stop there with the legumes because we've got a bit of stuff on the actual fertiliser.
Yeah.
We'll
The nitrogen at Condo, have you got any thoughts about where that went? Was that a waterlogging event or denitrification?
Yeah. We got very wet at Condo, like, you know, underwater in a couple of the wet seasons, so that certainly would have contributed to it. I'll get to it in a minute. At both Condo and at Wagga, we suspect we've got some subsurface acidity. We limed all the sites when we started this project, but I don't think we got the lime deep enough. We sort of had to twist people's arms to put on as much lime. We did 3.5 tonnes on most of the sites because we really wanted to get the soil right before we went into the legumes. But I don't think we got it deep enough. Same thing happened at our Greenfield site, and we got a horse tiger in and limed that in the end of phase 1 because we could just see we had a issue. Matt's just done the same thing at Wagga because Wagga had a clear acid band between about 5 and 15 centimetres. It was down at 4.4 pH or something like that. And we do wonder whether one of the differences obviously between Urana and Wagga is one's an acid, more acid soil, one's alkaline, like Urana's pH 6 to 7. And we think that affects both the performance of the legume, like the growth of the legume and the legume fixation, but potentially also the mineralisation of that nitrogen could be getting affected. Yeah. Condo probably also had a little bit less in the dry seasons, had a lot less rainfall, so there would have been less chance for mineralisation in the dry seasons. And then we got waterlogged in the wet seasons, so it's probably And last year we had a frost and 35 degrees in the same week, so it's been challenging. I'll just go on and talk a little bit about the fertiliser nitrogen. So, because the question is, what happens? The whole idea with this end banking idea is that we know we're not putting on enough nitrogen, and we're doing that because of the risk of either not getting a return on investment or losing it. And so we had a look to see, well, what happened in this system. So this is our intense baseline system, canola wheat, and we're just going to compare the low nitrogen strategy with the higher nitrogen strategy. So if you look at Wagga, on average in that canola wheat system, over the whole 6 years, we put on 103 kilos of N on average versus 144, so a bit of extra. And if we look at what we removed on average, we removed 92 and 105. So we're actually putting on more in both systems than we're removing. And that's the idea of keeping your system in a positive end balance so that you're not mining your soil organic matter. And that you have enough nitrogen there when you get those good seasons to capitalise on the rainfall. And so if you look at the nitrogen use efficiency, so we're only taking off 90% of what we're putting on, in the decile 2 system. In the decile 7 system, we're only taking off 73% of what we're putting on. So what's happening to the other 30% is the question. And so Matt and his team have been, we've all been measuring this around all of our sites. So if you look at the extra nitrogen applied in that decile 7 treatment, that's the amount of extra nitrogen that's been going on around the sites. If you then look at how much extra nitrogen we've been finding in the soil every year before sowing, you can see quite a bit of the extra we've been putting on is turning up in the soil the following year. So there's no legumes in here, this is just canola wheat. So a lot of that nitrogen is not being lost, a lot of that nitrogen is carrying through. And that sort of shows you that we're finding up to 70%, almost 80% in some cases. You can see at Urana, not so much. And again, we get pretty wet at Urana at times. times, and so we wonder whether we've lost some nitrogen to denitrification there in those wet years. But at the other sites, pretty good carryover of the additional N. And some of the extra N has also been giving us a yield boost. So, that's going to go out the gate. Not a very big yield boost, but on average. But it has been driving, higher gross margins. Now, whether or not that extra investment in nitrogen for those yield and gross margin benefits is exciting for you, I guess that depends on your own position on that. But I guess the message here is that we're not losing the additional N, and so we're not always losing the additional N, and so increasing your nitrogen fertiliser strategy to basically capture the upside in the wet years and to maintain your soil organic matter, I guess, is the idea behind the whole N banking strategy. And there are other projects going on with, including the ones that farming involved in, looking into that whole idea a little bit more, in a little bit more detail. Just moving on, like we realise bringing legumes into the system requires a lot of other skills, and you've got to have suitable soils. And this acidity point is something that I want to, stress. And this is the data from Wagga, so this is why we think maybe things weren't going so well at Wagga. So this is our level of pH, and you can see how it drops in that zone from 10 to sort of 15. Like if you're not measuring that, if you just take 0 to 10 at Wagga, you'll think, happy days, 5.6, what's the problem? But look a little deeper, where the legumes are trying to do their work, and you're into systems where aluminium's being released into the soil, and it's very toxic to plant roots and to rhizobia. So Matt, as I said, we finished phase 2. If we were going to do anything, it's the time to do it now. So he got a horse tiger in, and he's incorporated lime to 25 centimetres, or 20 centimetres? Yeah. Cultivated to 25, we've got the lime into 20, to try and ameliorate that. We've left some strips unameliorated, and Matt's played around with a few other treatments on the side. So I'm happy to say I got a letter from GRDC yesterday to say the project will continue, well, they're offering us to continue for another 4 years. So we'll be able to see going forward whether this treatment, how that plays out over the next 3 years, and whether the performance of the legumes at Wagga lifts and the systems with legumes lifts compared to what we're seeing at Urana.
Part of it's unlimed too, isn't it, John?
Yeah. We left unlimed strips, they're the strips you can. So, yeah, unlimed and uncultivated, so Matt set up all of the factorial sort of combinations, which will keep him and his team busy. Just a couple of other things. We've been talking about nitrogen. Obviously, there's weed control benefits from putting the legumes in your system. There's flexible options like hay and brown manure and so forth, and it's also a good cereal disease break. And to show you what happened at Urana, when we started the project in 2017, Urana was the only site that had a really high level of any of the diseases we were checking for, and this is crown rot. And basically you can see when we started, so in March 2018, there's 3 different systems I'm showing you there in different colours. So the baseline system is brown, the intense canola wheat is purple, if you're not colourblind, and the top one is green. That's our diverse system with the legume in it. And basically they all started in that high range, and after 3 years, in March 2021, basically the system with wheat and barley in it, so 2 hosts of crown rot, the disease has just gone up. Where we went to canola wheat, so only 1 host every 2nd year, it's gone down, but it's still in the medium category. And the only one that got it down into the low category within that first 3-year phase was the system that had canola legume wheat, because there's only 1 host in 3 years. So double break, as we call that, has really sort of helped with crown rot. And last year, 2023, we think at Urana that was driving this yield difference. We got an extra 0.6 of a tonne of wheat in the system that had the double break compared to the system with barley and wheat. And we saw quite a bit of crown rot around last year. So we've just taken all of the soil samples to do disease predictor beat again after 6 years, and we'll do weed measured the soil carbon, we've done greenhouse gas emissions measurements. So yeah, we've got a lot more data to sort of dig through, but I'll leave it at that, Matt. Any questions on that? So that was just a bit about the fertiliser. So you know, if you're using fertiliser rather than legume to up your nitrogen, like in our systems, it seems like a lot of that fertiliser, if you don't use it in the year you put it in, you know, it's not necessarily all lost. There's obviously soils and circumstances where risk of loss is higher, and you probably know those, you know, low-lying waterlogged type soils. But we're finding a lot of it's carrying over, and it's showing up in the soil through time. So in your calculations, in your budgeting and your calculations, if you're in a position where your soil organic matter's running down, it could be because you're in negative nitrogen balance, and using a legume or upping your nitrogen fertiliser, whatever works for you, is going to get your crops and your systems closer to that water limit potential.
Thank you, John. Have you got any further questions for John on that?
Is there anything going to change, like in the next phase, in terms of rotation? I'm just thinking, like, made a comparison with the legumes between your runner and Wagga, and it just seems like the favour in its own right is more profitable than the lumen.
Yeah, that's changed.
Yeah.
So we're going for favours at both sites now, I think, Matt, isn't it? Yeah, Wagga. So we had the discussions with the advisors, and we talked all that through, just to keep the integrity of the trial going, so that we can get sort of 9 years of data. Most things stay the same, but we are changing a few things. So yeah, we're going to shift to favours at Condo and Wagga. What else is changing, Matt? We're putting some of our nitrogen fertiliser on a bit earlier. We're not leaving it all to top dress. We think we've had crops that were a bit underdone early for nitrogen, so that's another thing we're going to do. I think we're adding, well, there's a few things changing with the grazing crops, but anything else changing with the crop only systems? That's about it, I think. From a weed perspective, we didn't have any tragic weed issues in any of these paddocks. So what we've been doing is keeping an eye on the cost. So each system requires different herbicides, and we do that all in conjunction with the advisors. What we do know is how much it's cost us to keep weeds under control. The last time I looked, I think we were saving about $30 a hectare in our diverse systems, just because we've used less and cheaper herbicides than in our more intense systems. So it's just costing us more. The weed seed banks will tell us whether we're shifting things in any direction, but we didn't start with bad ryegrass crops or anything like that. But Farmland did a study here before we started this one, and it showed we started with a hell of a lot of herbicide-resistant ryegrass, and that more diverse system, I think it had vetch for hay, canola, wheat, barley. That was the I think as profitable, less risky, and ended up with less herbicide-resistant ryegrass than just sticking to the canola wheat system. Even we threw everything out, expensive herbicides, hybrid canola. But yeah, we can't do harvest weeds